You, if you are just getting started or haven't done this work before, are probably also overwhelmed. And so that's what this is for, is for us all to gain that confidence so that we can advocate for each other advocate for our SACAC going forward. And with that, I'll kick it over to Kelly and Jade.
Hi, y'all. I'm Jade Domain, and I, along with Kelly, am one of the co-chairs for the Government Relations Committee. Prior to my time on SACAC board, I was the Georgia Government Relations co-chair, so I kind of managed advocacy programming in the state of Georgia. And this is actually my third year on the SACAC board, so this is my final year. And before kind of rolling off, something that Kelly and I kind of had a conversation about doing was hosting this SACAC-wide program to help educate our members on different NACAC policy issues that we advocate for, and help people feel confident and excited about opportunities to advocate. Some work that Kelly and I do is kind of overseeing all of the individual SACAC states. We are also hoping to implement programming in Puerto Rico as well. But we essentially oversee some of the efforts that our states do. Our state chairs are doing incredible work. You will hear from them throughout the program to make sure that the members in their state are kind of getting that education about different policy issues and how that impacts their state specifically. And when I say policy issues, we're really talking about education access policy. And also putting on programming to give states the opportunity to give SACAC members the opportunity to really advocate for those different issues. We are recording this webinar, and part of that, and I'm going to let Kelly speak a little bit more to it, but we wanted to provide this as a resource. A lot of our kind of education and advocacy programming in the past had been in our in-person legislative days, and those are amazing, and I really want to encourage them. But we also know that that can be an access issue, certainly for people who have trouble leaving the building, but also for people like, say, you live in Miami and your state capital is in Tallahassee. That is a drive, right? And so kind of to make this accessible, we plan to utilize this resource to put it on our website so that in the future, if people want to learn more about how to advocate, they're able to do so through looking at our website. On the note of this being recorded, something you're going to hear us say a lot throughout this presentation is that the work that we do is representing SACAC and not our individual institutions. So that said, if you think that your institution might have, an issue with kind of this, you being, representing them on this recording, I would encourage you to maybe take out any kind of descriptive pieces from your name or your background or things like that could be associated with your institution, because you are here as a SACAC member and as a constituent, and not so much representing your institution if your institution is concerned about that. All right, so those are some of my disclaimers and welcomes, and I want to give Kelly the opportunity to introduce herself and talk a little bit more about what we're doing today.
Thank you, Jade. We're having major PowerPoint issues, so y'all just bear with us. So sorry. But again, I'm just echoing everything Jade said. We wanted this webinar to be accessible for everybody moving forward. Working and talking with legislators is so intimidating. That's what we hear back from our members more often than not, is that it's just so intimidating. And you feel like you have to make this grand gesture to have success. But there are so many things you can do just as a part of your everyday practice. And we want people to know what those things are and just building the confidence. I think that's what we do with our students every day when we work with them, is helping them build the confidence to advocate for themselves. So we want to do that for our colleagues and our coworkers, to build that confidence so we can implement change in our own state and our country that best benefits not just our students, but honestly, the working environments that we have as well. So this is kind of Jade's legacy, as we keep joking, as she rolls off this year. We hope to just have this live on our website to be a resource for you and to share out with your colleagues as well. And we're so thankful to have our individual state chairs. Like Jade said, Jade and I have the privilege of serving on the board in this role as government relations, but really the great work we get to do is with the state chairs who are in their states living this out day to day. And so before we have our next speaker, I wanted to share a quote from one of our members. Aaron Layton used to be really, really involved on the Atlanta government relations side of things. And we are so lucky to have her work that she's done for that state. She's not able to join us today, but we really, really wanted to share a quote from her. So let me pull that up. And this is a great transition into our first speaker, who we'll introduce in just a moment as well. So Aaron says, knowing what is coming up in my legislator that we can advocate for is helpful. I feel a little directionless going into those meetings without something specific, knowing who to talk to. So do I go to my local person? Do I talk to the people on the education committee, etc.? Understanding that legislators are just folks. I love that she said that. And that they work for us. So talking to them is definitely something we can and should do. She said, finding ways to advocate, sometimes that feels overwhelming. Is it only emailing? Is it going and sitting in front of them? Having access to and a better understanding of what our state's priorities are is where I need to start. So in saying all of that, we are going to kick off into our speaker. And I think our first speaker, and I think Jade is going to introduce her.
Yes, I am you first speaker, colleague and a friend of mine, Ashley Young. So Ashley works for the Georgia Budget and Policy Institute as an education analyst, and her work is centered on higher education policy, advocacy, and research to provide all Georgians with equitable opportunities to access post-secondary education. Before joining GBPI, she was a founding college counselor at Charles R. Drew Charter School in Atlanta Public Schools from 2016 to 2022. Ashley's journey in college access also includes roles as an admission counselor and TRIO program coordinator. Oh, I didn't know that TRIO program coordinator piece, assisting students who were historically excluded from building wealth and first-generation college students in the college access process. She is passionate about empowering educators to use their voices beyond the voting booth and building advocacy coalitions to make change for Georgia's most marginalized students. Outside of work, she is pursuing her doctorate in education policy studies at Georgia State University and attending festivals, brunch, reading, and spending time with her dog, Mozzie. And I also want to mention that Ashley has served as a Georgia Legislative Day co-chair as well. So she is very familiar with this work, government relations. And with that, I will turn things over to Ashley.
All right. Good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. On the East Coast time. Still good morning for our Central folks. I am so happy to be here today. It is a great day to talk legislative process, right? And so we are excited to have you all here. I'm going to share my screen. And as Jade said, I am excited to just give you some fundamentals, provide you all with just some fundamentals of the legislative process. I think it is so hilarious that I am seen as the expert now, which means that we can all do this work and become our subject matter experts. So without further ado, I am going to share my screen. Do you all see it here? Yes. Okay. Excellent. Excellent. So I am going to get started. And to kind of help situate, like, who is GBPI? What is it all about? I've never heard of it. Just kind of want to help give you all some context to where I'm at now, the type of work that I'm doing, and how you all can get connected in your respective states. So GBPI, our mission is to advance lasting solutions that will help not only with economic opportunities, but with the well-being for all Georgians. We at GBPI absolutely envision a fair, inclusive, and anti-racist Georgia, where all people can prosper. We have policy areas in health justice, economic justice, immigration, higher education, K-12, just to name a few. All right, so let's jump right in. I want to talk to you all a little bit about just really the fundamentals of state legislatures, right? And I will, at the end, talk a little bit more about finding the source of power. But for today's conversation, we're going to be focused on our state government. Even though I work for Georgia Budget and Policy Institute, and of course, live in Georgia and do my work here, what I have done is I've adapted the information to incorporate all of our states and territories within SACAC. So everyone can feel seen, everyone can get a little bit of information about their state and their legislative processes. So what I'm going to give may seem a little bit sort of like, okay, I kind of understand this. So we might be in different places, but it's good to kind of start it at the beginning point. So of course we have a governor. States have governors and they have the power to set the revenue estimate, right? And so they draft a budget annually, and it is generally handed over to the General Assembly so that the General Assembly can sort of get in the weeds of that budget, right? And so the governor has power to line item veto bills and to veto bills altogether, right? The governor also provides the floor leaders, so in both of your chambers, your House chamber and your Senate chamber, your governor will generally provide those leaders with an agenda for what that policy agenda will look like for that upcoming legislative session. In the General Assembly, you will have your House of Representatives and you have members, and that is according to the number of folks in this in your state, which is according to the districts, right? So you will have House of Representatives, so that is one chamber, and then the other chamber is the Senate. So this is much like Congress, right? So you have your House chamber, your Senate chamber, you have members in both. It all depends on population, it all depends on district, and of course, these are elected officials. In the House of Representatives, generally in your state governments, you will have a leader of the House, and in the Senate, you will have a leader in the Senate, and that's sometimes referred to as like the lieutenant governor, okay? All right, so let's go over the legislative process, key elements that you want to be mindful of. So if you are maybe on your first legislative day coming up or on your fifth legislative day, I think there's still information that you can learn that will be helpful to this process, because seeing the process from this perspective will give you a lot better of an understanding as you think about how a bill becomes law. And we'll get into that in just a moment. So what should you know about your state? One, you should know when is the legislative session scheduled or the time frame. So for instance, in particular states where, let's say I'll just take Georgia, for example, where our legislative session starts the second Monday of every January and goes for 40 days. In the month of September, there are no decisions being made in our state legislature. There might be joint committee session meetings. There might be, there might be committee session meetings or study session committee meetings on a particular issue. But in terms of voting on a bill to become law, there is a special time frame in each state that takes place. So knowing when that time frame is important, because that is when you will do some of your or most of your advocacy work, right? And as a lobbyist, that's where we engage in a lot of our government relations during that time. The fiscal year budget operation period, how long, when you have this fiscal note, right? How long can those funds be engaged with? Can they be spent? What is the year? What does your fiscal year look like? And we'll talk about that. Legislation assignments and session cycle. So as Jade mentioned, I think a little bit earlier, I think it was in a quote, but there are assignments that committees will be given based on the content of the bill. So logically, if this is a higher education bill about, say, need-based aid in Georgia, it is generally assigned to the higher education committee, right? And wherever the bill is initiated, so say the bill is initiated in the Senate or the bill is initiated in the House, it will follow that particular chamber and the process. So I'll get more into that in just a moment because there's a little bit more information that I want to add. And then there's a session cycle. So there's a time in which bills are considered. When that session cycle is over, you will have to reintroduce the bill in a different fashion. But as long as that session, depending on how long the session is, you can, or the legislature can vote on that bill, can have hearings on that bill through that session cycle. And then why are House and Senate committees important? When we talk a little bit more about how a bill is passed, you will see that it has everything to do with the committee assignments, right? A bill just doesn't get sponsored and then you vote on it and it becomes a bill. It has to start and go through a committee process, okay? So this is where I hope you all will see your state, rep for your state. We have, I have really wanted to make this practical for you all. So when we think about the legislative session, I can tell you, and this was from a quick Google search. So Florida has a 60-day legislative session. And Louisiana can go no longer than 60 legislative days, a period out of 85 days. So it's kind of nuanced. South Carolina, it varies from what I understand. In 2022, it convened on January 11th and it adjourned June 15th. In Puerto Rico, it also varies. And what I can tell you about Puerto Rico is that the special session can last no longer than 20 days. Shout out to Ballotopia. That is my reference for today. Some of our state folks may know, maybe slightly different, but this is generally found from a quick Google search, right? But either way, you want to know in your state, right? What is a legislative session? You want to know what is the fiscal year budget operation period. This is pretty standard for most states. I did find for Arkansas and North Carolina that it, of course, begins on July 1 and ends on June 30th. Legislative session assignments. So for instance, Georgia, again, has House and Senate leaders. So we have the Speaker of the House and we have the Lieutenant Governor in the Senate. These are the leaders in their chambers, right? And so they're assigned to each committee, all the bills based on the content or the nature of the bills. And again, we have a 2-year cycle here in Georgia. House and Senate committee importance. So I'll just say, for example, Alabama has 33 House committees and 33 Senate committees. Excuse me, I think that might, I may have put that number in wrong, but for Alabama in each state, right, they will have a certain number of House committees and a certain number of Senate committees. Now, how is a bill passed? Y'all, I just have to cackle because, wow. Y'all ready? Thumbs up. Who's ready? Hold on to your edges. Okay. This is a lot. No lie. I just finished my first session as a lobbyist and I literally compared it, hang on here with me, as like a baby coming to fruition, right? You know, there's so many unfortunate things that can happen. So when you have a baby, when a baby is born, we consider that a miracle. So when a bill is passed, it's a miracle because look at all of the actual steps it has to go through to actually become a bill. And at any point in this process, that bill can either stall, it can die. I mean, there's some other verbs, but it can just essentially not make it to law, okay? I won't go through this because I don't have enough time, but I wanted you all to see, and I'm using Mississippi as an example, what it takes you from introducing it. It goes through committees, right? So as I said earlier, committees are so important. Without committee, you can forget it. Without committee support, hearing, that is where you engage in the testimonies and the debate. Committees are super important. It generally will have to go to, in the initiating chamber, let's just say it's a Senate bill, it has to go through the Senate, pass a vote there, and in many cases cross over into the other chamber, right? Go through the House committee, go through a House vote. It then has to go on the governor's desk. And the governor may not veto the whole bill, but they may veto a line item. So it's a lot. This is what it looks like in Georgia. This is on our website, Georgia Budget and Policy Institute. But look at all of these process things. Again, it is a miracle when a bill passes. And then lastly, I have Arkansas here. They didn't even care to put the numbers up here because there's just so many steps. But again, I just wanted to kind of give you all a quick overview of how a bill can become law. Now, real life example, college completion grants in Georgia. It is emergency funding to help students get across the finish line while we are still working for comprehensive need-based aid. I did want to give you all a quick example of what House Bill 1435 a couple years looked like through its process. So let's start at the very bottom. On February 24th, it started in the House hopper, and then it had to go through several reads. It had to go through some substitution adoptions. It then had to cross over into the Senate. It then had to be read by the Senate, debated in the Senate, and then they had to agree on an amendment, and then it had to be sent over to the governor, and the governor had to sign it. So from February to July, it baked in the belly of the legislator and was born on July 1st, right? So this kind of gives you an understanding and hopefully can ease some of your frustrations and kind of give you a peek behind the curtain of all of what goes into a bill being passed, the importance of the committees, and why this type of information is important for you to know when you're talking to legislators. Now, I just had to hit you all with this. I hope you have your jelly or your apple butter ready because I have to know what burns your biscuits. So for all of my colleagues who we've been working together for a little while now, you know I'm going to ask what burns your biscuits. This is so important to know because I truly believe this is what gets your feet on the floor and rain or shine, literally or figuratively, right? Is it an issue of dual enrollment in your state? Is it an issue of free tuition for to your colleges at your state? Is it an issue of sanctuaries for undocumented students? What is your issue in your state that burns your biscuits that is going to, and let me just quickly go back, really help you want to stay the course through all of these steps? And I'll be honest, there are some issues that I'm fired up about. And I'm like, okay, I want to see change, but to know what burns your biscuits means that I am going to vehemently, fervently, and all those fiery adjectives, right? I am going to stand 10 toes down for this issue and I'm going to see it through this process. So that's why I have to ask folks, what burns your biscuits? That's what gets you engaged with this work, to get engaged with Legislative Day, to follow up, to serve in SACAC, to run for the board, to again, see these bills through so that you can actually see the difference made in your state and in your community. So I just want to leave you with a few advocacy tips. And Jay kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but you want to find your legislative tool, and locate the power sources, right? So it may not be the state legislature. It could be your city council, right? It could be some other governing body. Again, for the sake of this conversation, we're talking a lot about state legislatures, but it could be another governing body. So I want you to identify the power source. Without that, it's going to be very difficult to make change, right? Because they're either going to point you in a different direction or you'll just continue talking in circles until you find who actually has the power to make change on this issue. Now, exposure to quick legislative news. We do not have time to read full research reports. I just finished one, so excited. I can follow with more information about that for all my Georgia folks who may be interested. But the truth of the matter is, everyday practitioners on the ground just don't have time to read long research reports. I want the lit bits. I want the quick information. How do you find that? What surprised me in my job as an education analyst is that I get paid to tweet. And so what does that mean? I get paid to get on Twitter or X and give commentary on these types of issues. So that means you should be following folks in your state who are lobbying for these issues. You should be following your legislators. They're giving updates and newsletters. So getting that quick legislative news will not only be helpful, but it will help ease feeling overwhelmed and feeling like I need to read a report after I'm done with work. Because let's be honest, that may not happen. So getting that quick exposure on your social media, getting subscriptions from your legislators is going to be helpful. Connecting with the experts, and this is why I chuckled a little bit earlier. As seen as an expert, again, we are in this together, but there are folks who are going to be working on this while you all are doing your jobs as admissions counselors or college counselors or in your community-based organizations. So what am I trying to say? You don't have to know it all. Thank goodness. You want to organize with coalitions if possible. You want to reach out, and you are the expert in what you do. Right? I can tell you from my experience as a college counselor at Drew, I could tell you day in and day out, my experience as a college counselor, the needs of my students, what we should be advocating for in Georgia. But the admissions counselor in North Carolina, what's your story? Right? The community-based organization in Mississippi, what's your story? How are you engaging with the agenda in your state? For the Florida college counselor, what is it that you need to be speaking about? What are you the subject matter expert on, right? So again, you don't have to know it all. Know your role and be comfortable being able to speak about that. And again, connecting with your experts. So again, I'm with GBPI, Georgia Budget and Policy Institute, but thankfully we have state priorities, and I'm going to send this out to Jade and Kelly so that they can send this in the follow-up email. But these are clickable links here, so you can see from, and it's not in every state, unfortunately, but for most of our SACAC states, you do have corresponding research and policy organizations that you can go to that's providing similar information that we do at GBPI. So Alabama Arise, Florida Policy Institute, Louisiana Budget and Project, Arkansas Advocates for Children and Families. I took Spanish. I'm not that great at Spanish, so I don't want to mess this word up, but that is the organization for Puerto Rico, Espacios Abiertos. I think that's it. And of course, Georgia Budget and Policy Institute. So these are some state partners that can help you all get more information on what I just went over, get you connected with some other coalitions, and just really sort of give you that foundation that you need to feel confident in speaking to your legislator. So that is it for me. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you all can get back to the main presentation. But I hope that was helpful. That was very quick and dirty, if you will. But again, just a couple of takeaways here. It is a miracle to pass a bill. So if it feels hard, that's because it is, right? Secondly, what burns your biscuits? Like if you can't leave here today thinking about what burns my biscuits, I think you want to really engage with that so you know how to approach this work, right? I'm an Aries, I'm a fire sign, so I'm constantly passionate, like getting worked up, 0 to 90, have to come back down, but it's important that we use our compassion for good, right? And then lastly, the advocacy tips that I shared with you all, getting connected with experts, getting those pieces of information from your social media, and just also knowing where that power source is going to be super important. So I don't know if that was my time. I'm pretty sure it is. I'm going to stop now, turn it back over to Jade, and thank you all so much for having me. I hope this was helpful.
Thank you so much, Ashley, for the civics lesson and also for reminding us to kind of pay attention to the issues that would really kind of make us want to engage in this process. Earlier, we were having some PowerPoint issues, but we figured it out. So just wanted to kind of go over our agenda for the day in a place that y'all can see it. So you already had the introduction and legislator overview. Coming up next, we are going to hear from CJ Powell from NACAC. I'm going to speak a little bit later on how to talk to a legislator. I think Ashley really kind of prepared us for that part, but kind of the how of this all. And then toward the end of the webinar, we are going to go into state breakout rooms. And essentially your state chairs are going to give you the opportunity to kind of debrief about all of this information you're collecting as a state, because the issues that are kind of pertinent to Louisiana might look really different than Tennessee, right? So having that opportunity to really debrief debrief of it as a state. Your state chairs have kind of prepared for this, or have absolutely prepared for this. So I really do hope you'll stick around for that rich discussion toward the end. And then we will also do a brief Q&A toward the end, but you can feel free to add chat questions, thoughts, amens, whatever to the chat. And we appreciate you for that. And then I'm going to turn it over to Bailey to introduce our next speaker.
Hey, Jade, really quickly, I want to launch a poll in the Q&A for everybody in the chat. Please answer that so we know what breakout room to put you in. So if you can just take a second to do that while Bailey is introducing our next speaker.
Oh, hang on, let me do this poll really quick. It popped up right on the front of my screen. Yeah, so this is a quote that I put in. So kind of like, I think it was Justin that had mentioned earlier. They sent out a survey to all of our state chairs and just kind of had us fill out these questions. So for me, for people who want to start advocating more, the biggest thing, and I think Ashley hit on this as well, is that change is really slow. That's true for higher education, but that's also true for politics sometimes. Two of the things that we don't want to be slow, they're often the slowest. So there's a lot of red tape and it can really slow things down, but don't get discouraged. And if you're wanting to start advocating, just know that you have a really great support system here in your state chairs, but also in Jake and Kelly and other state chairs too. If you're not from Alabama and you need someone to help you with something, I'm pretty sure anyone from any other state would also be helpful. Me and Andrew would be helpful if you need that. But I will go ahead and introduce our next speaker. So CJ Powell serves as the Director of Advocacy at SACAC, where he leads the advocacy efforts for the association's 26,000 plus members on the state and federal level on all issues related to college access. Most recently, he served as a Biden-Harris appointee at the U.S. Department of Education, beginning as a special assistant to the Assistant Secretary for Post-Secondary Education before his promotion to the Chief of Staff role in the same office. While at the department, CJ worked on a wide range of topics, including the Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund, student basic needs, college access programs, college completion programs, and affirmative action. Prior to his federal service, CJ served as the inaugural Higher Education Program Analyst at the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights and the Leadership Conference Education Fund. In this role, he led the Higher Education Civil Rights Coalition, a table of more than 50 national civil rights and policy organizations, and led the development of the first full higher education policy agenda from the civil rights community. CJ began his career in education equity as a college advisor in the College Advising Corps, assisting students in rural North Carolina in planning their post-secondary lives. Following grad school, CJ served as the founding director of college preparation for a new high school in Nashville, Tennessee. He earned his BA in Religious Studies from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and an MS.Ed in Higher Education from the University of Pennsylvania. CJ, take it away.
Thank you so much, Bailey, for that introduction, and thank you, Jane Kelly, for the invitation. As a Southerner born in Mississippi, going to school in North Carolina and working in Tennessee, it's very exciting to hear the melodic accents that I'm hearing and hearing y'all say y'all and not have people look at you like you have 15 different heads. Because sometimes I have to remind the folks here in DC that they are in fact below the Mason-Dixon line. And so that's always fun for me. I am here to talk about our policy priorities from NACAC's national perspective. And I think some of the big takeaways that you'll see is that these policy pillars allow us to be flexible so that we are able to advocate for whatever policies our members are seeing are as necessary for increasing access and removing barriers to higher education, increasing college completion, and increasing support for the professionals who work in college access and higher education and admissions. And so the three policy pillars that are really foundational to the work that we do here at NACAC. The first one is student and equity-centered admission practices. The second is professional responsibility and ethics for college admission counseling professionals. And the third is expansion of capacity and impact of school counselors and college advisors. And I'm going to go into what each of these mean subsequently. But these were designed prior to my arrival and as a reflection of what the membership felt that it needed to make sure that its voice was being heard, both on Capitol Hill as well as in the state legislatures. So the first one, student equity center admissions practices. That focuses on emphasizing the needs of systemically underserved students. So thinking about all the students who have been historically excluded from higher education when higher education began back in the 1600s in the United States. Thinking about ways to expand NACAC's policy playing field. Thinking about equity allows us to really dive deeply into some issue areas that don't necessarily always fit neatly in quote unquote college access, or at least explicitly, I should say. So when we think about things like equitable access to study abroad, for instance, that is meaningful in how college counselors and school counselors are able to do their jobs as they represent institutions and put school institutions on students' lists. It's also important for the admissions professionals on the other side of the desk who are going out and talking to students from a wide variety of backgrounds, and saying, hey, you will have access to this important learning opportunity, even though when you think about empowering and emphasizing the needs of systemically underserved students, study abroad might not come up. We are able to think about ways in which we can be strategic there, and support bills that will allow students who have never really been centered to be centered moving forward. And then building NACAC into a clearinghouse for equity-centered practice. We want to make sure that folks on the Hill know that they can come to NACAC and our members for some of these equity-centered practices. So when they're thinking about bills and they're thinking about legislation that they may want to draft up to implement policy on a scaled level across the country, they need to come to us because we know as the experts in the room what is actually going to help move the needle for our students. And so it's really important for us that we are seen as a resource because of the outstanding work and of our membership, but also because of the respect that our membership deserves in this field because of their expertise. We should be seen as the resource there. And so that is one of the things that we do, both from a Hill perspective and also just for our members to know that if they have questions about things, they can come to NACAC and find some of those equity-centered practices resourced available. Next, 2 slides, please. I'm sorry. The next one is ethics and admission counseling. So first, we want to make sure that we are educating all the practitioners on ethical practices because working with students is really important, and there are fewer higher callings than making sure that the next generation is ready for their next steps. And so we want to make sure that those ethics are held to a high standard. We also want to make sure that we communicate the standards to the public policymakers and media so that we can build that credibility and make sure that we are seen, again, as those experts and as people who have really high ethics so that when they're coming to us and asking us questions, there's no concerns about what third party is getting an extra benefit or a kickback from this. What's really the bottom line? We're here to serve students and we're here to serve the profession, and that's really it. And because we're doing that work, we're here doing nation building work. And so that's what's the most important. And so we want to make sure that we are able to communicate that very clearly to external parties. And then lastly, advocate for public policies that emphasize ethics in the college transition. Sometimes this looks very easy and like simple sound bite statements like we want to make sure that for-profits don't defraud students, for instance, because as school counselors and college advisors, we know that sometimes for-profits will come and sell our students a dream, and $30,000, $50,000 later, they are left worse off than had they gone to college. We also, sometimes it gets a little wonky. So things like incentive compensation bans. It's a lot of syllables. It's a lot of words. It's like, what is going on there? And that's really making sure that schools or people who work at colleges and universities don't get a bonus for enrolling more students than their colleagues, because that creates a toxic environment to have students coming to college and enrolling and going through the higher education pipeline. And so we really want to make sure that some of those things are codified either in regulation from the Department of Education or in law through things like the Higher Education Act, which LOL has not been reauthorized since 2009. So we're due for that reauthorization, but we want to make sure that some of these ethics get codified so that we are able to hold those bad practitioners and bad actors accountable. And we're also able to lift up and spotlight why it's so important that we treat these students well, and we are acting in the best interest of these students and their families and our profession. Next slide. Thank you. Support for school counselors and college advising. This has become increasingly important. NACAC and all of our affiliates were obviously on this before it was cool, but the pandemic made this kind of really come to light as people were saying, who's here to support our students through these tough times? Everyone was like, it's the counselors who've been there from the beginning, but have been super stretched thin, underworked, are overworked, underpaid, and really burning the candle at both ends there. And so every year we release the State of College Admission, where we highlight and show the student to counselor ratios in each state. And we also have where you can drill down a bit deeper. Those are going to be immensely helpful when you are going into your conversations with legislators. Most folks think that their district or their state is doing amazingly well in all things. That's how they got elected. They were selling visions of hope. But that's not the truth all the time. And so you all know that as practitioners in the state, and sometimes that data can be really humbling to policymakers because, they thought that they were crushing the student to counselor ratio and that everything was fine. Come to find out that that's in fact not the case. Or perhaps that's the case in one part of their district, but the other side of their district is the exact opposite, and those counselors are really stressed thin. And so this is going to be one of our evergreen policy initiatives, and for the time being, until it gets fixed. I don't know if that time is going to be soon, quite honestly. I think we're seeing a lot of money go out the doors for a lot of other initiatives and a lot of other things, but not enough is going to education in order to support that. But states are really powerful in that. And I think this is going to be a place where we see maybe more traction at the state level than the federal level for the time being. We also want to make sure that we are providing support for best practice information in the state and local setting. So if there's anything that you're able to modify and tweak and turn into a potential bill for your state house, this could be something that we would emphasize. And then also train practitioners in equipping schools to meet the advising needs of students. This is, again, one of those things that starts out maybe really small, but can snowball into some policies and practices that can be codified in state and federal law. And that is immensely important. I think from the federal level, the best policies that come are those that come from the ground up. So from the grassroots, from the folks who are on those front lines working with impacted communities every day. Those ideas for policy as they move up are so much more helpful than the federal government coming down with a one-size-fits-all policy for the entire country. And so whatever those best practices that you all have developed or that you've seen in your states, those things can bubble up and become codified or proposed in new bills moving forward. And that happens all the time. When I was at the Department of Education and Secretary Cardona said, CJ, what are some ideas about addressing student basic needs on college campuses so that they can graduate and that a flat tire isn't the reason that they don't continue in their education? I was able to go into the states and see these these emergency grant aid programs to say, this is something that should be codified in federal law. This shouldn't be just incumbent upon the states. This is something we should all be taking on. And so those things are really, really important. So those best practices, those trainings that you all do are things that folks in the policy space will look to see the results of and hopefully be able to scale up moving forward to help really move the needle for our students. Next slide, please. And here are some general principles and or legislation that NACAC support. This is certainly not an exhaustive list. This is just to show you the diversity of topics and things that we support. So college affordability is the first one. We are all aboard the double pedal train like everyone else is, but we also know that there are important work and steps to be done to increase the knowledge about federal state partnerships, which can help to lower the price tag of college education for students in the states. We need more states to buy into it because without their investment, it only is a one-way transaction. But there are many ways to skin a cat, as my grandmother says, and college affordability is one of those ways. Whether it be book scholarships embedded into your state budgets, or whether it be meal plans that are free on your college campuses for students. There are different ways to get to that college affordability, and the Pell Grant is the most notable one, but there are many other things that we can think about to really get at the affordability crisis that students face when they get to school. Students' protections against fraud and abuse, that kind of goes back to what I mentioned earlier about incentive compensation bans, ensuring for-profits aren't taking advantage of students by lying to them and signing them up for student loans that they can't pay back because they don't have a credential or an industry recognized credential and things like that. DACA and DREAM Act, so ensuring that students, regardless of their immigration status, have access to affordable higher education is incredibly important to NACAC. As our country becomes more diverse, without having some pathway to affordable higher education for people of varying immigration statuses, we are only hindering ourselves as a country. People, I think policymakers may hear from their constituents that they are enacting some sort of punishment, saying, you know, folks didn't come here the right way, so we're going to make sure that that is held accountable with tuition, but completely missed the point that folks are paying state taxes and that they deserve to have access to those state institutions at in-state rates because of that function. That is the end of that sentence. And so it's really important to us that we make sure that the dreams of those students are able to be realized by an affordable pathway to higher education. Global student mobility, so ensuring that students from around the world are able to access higher education in the States is also really important. That's important for the diverse exchange of ideas. It's important for our college campuses to prepare our students for what they will enter into the world. And it's also important because xenophobia and prejudice is bad, right? Like, quite frankly, and that is sometimes things that we see pop up in a lot of these conversations about who is allowed to come to school in the United States can be rooted a lot in xenophobia and a desire to not have students from abroad come here. And then one of the other pieces is transfer pathways. Transfer pathways in many states is broken. And I say that as like a kind understatement with all the love in my heart. But we have to make sure that students are able to move seamlessly throughout the higher education pipeline. So if they start at a community college or a junior college, there's no reason that most of their classes or all of their classes should be able to transfer to their four-year institution of their choice in their state. And that connects back to the college affordability issue, because if they're not able to transfer those courses, they have to retake classes, add on to their bill for higher education, and really kind of be put behind the 8 ball. So many of these items that are listed here of our support are connected because our education system is very much interconnected and our lives are interconnected, but also really wanted to show the diverse perspective or the diverse issues that we can work on here at NACAC in the federal level, and that you all should feel comfortable allowing that to burn your biscuits, to use Ashley's phrase, on the state legislature level, because there's a lot of things that can be done on the state legislature level while we wait for action from the federal level. And then I just wanted to provide you with some places where you can stay up to date with information from NACAC. There's the NACAC Wonk on Twitter, run by our Chief Education and Policy Officer, David Hawkins. We also have our NACAC Bulletin Journal that comes out every couple of weeks. And so there's regularly blurbs and links in there about either bills that we have endorsed, what's going on at the federal Department of Education, and the like. So that's a really great way to stay in the know of some of the high level topics. And then we also have our NACAC website, which has plenty of information for you all to really dig into and sink your teeth in. And so I think that is all my time, but I just wanted to make sure that I was able to share those policy perspectives. And so thank you so much for the invitation.
CJ, thanks so much for sharing that expertise and that inspirational information with us. It can be really hard for us sometimes to know where to start, and this is a really helpful first step. My name is Frank Thomas. I'm one of the co-chairs of governmental relations in Florida. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm from Rollins College. I've been politically active almost all my life, and one of the best and most effective ways that I've seen to advocate for things that are important to you is to make your message personal. There is, as you can see on the screen, there's nothing that's going to glaze over an aide's eyes quicker or a legislator's eyes quicker than a form letter, something that they've seen the exact same wording over and over again. So the best thing that you can do, no matter what level that you're trying to advocate at, is to personalize your message so that it reaches them and makes them feel like an individual is speaking to them. Kelly?
Awesome. Just a reminder, please keep adding questions to the chat. I know some of you are having to go in and out, but next I'm going to hand it over to Emily.
Thank you. So I am Emily Lamb, and I'm one of the co-chairs for government relations in Tennessee. And last year I had the opportunity to attend my first day on the Hill at the Tennessee State Capitol. And I remember being very nervous about how to talk to a legislator or even what to say. And Betsy from Franklin Road Academy presented a session called How to Talk to a Legislator to the group. And it really gave me the tools and confidence I needed to have a conversation about those important issues. And within a few minutes of chatting with our legislator, my colleague and I were quickly realized that we were the experts in the room. And I think it was just such an empowering session to hear from Betsy. So we were really reassured that we are the experts who are on the ground working with students every day. So we actually wanted to bring something similar to all of SACAC today. So we're lucky to have Jade, who has served as the government relations chair for 3 years and is now the dean of college counseling at the Atlanta Girls School. She'll present on how to talk to a legislator.
Okay, hi y'all. So my goal in this part of the conversation is to help you feel, first of all, like confident speaking to a legislator, but also talking through some of the logistics about what kind of goes down in that conversation itself. I wanted to start with a story. So much of kind of what is helpful in these conversations is being able to share a story. So I thought that I would model that and also kind of give you a sense of why I kind of do this advocacy work. So some of you might know that I am from New Orleans. It is like my favorite thing to talk about. It's my favorite place in the world. When I was 12 years old is when Hurricane Katrina hit and really devastated the city, but especially kind of two really important parts of the city for me. So the neighborhood that I grew up in, New Orleans East, is a predominantly Black neighborhood in New Orleans, was really devastated by the storm. And so was the neighborhood that my school was located at, which is the Lakeview area, which is a predominantly white neighborhood in New Orleans. And when we kind of returned to the city, when it was safe to do so, we went back and kind of, we're living in the neighborhood that I grew up in. And in my 20 to 30 minute commute to the neighborhood that my school was located in, that gave me a lot of time to look around and reflect and notice the ways that the city was investing in the neighborhood that my school was located in and neglecting the neighborhood that I'd grown up in. And it was really kind of it was just something I could see so easily and kind of wanted to scream, why isn't this something that other people are noticing, talking about those kinds of things? And so I was 12 years old and I think that also helped me to start finding language around something that had frustrated me growing up, which was in this kind of predominantly white neighborhood that I was going to school in. I could say the school was predominantly white, but it was really like all white. Like I was one of maybe like 2 students of color in my grade. And I noticed how people in my classes would kind of talk about the public schools in New Orleans in a way that felt really kind of elitist. And I noticed that the public schools, again, were typically all Black, and the private schools were a lot of the time all white. And even among the other kind of private schools in the area, associations with the ones that were more diverse were a little bit more negative than the ones that were predominantly white. And so that was something that, you know, I kept like, I was looking around, I'm like, this is a predominantly Black city, but my school is almost exclusively white. Like it was another thing that just kind of made me like, why aren't we talking about this? Like I was so frustrated and confused by these things, and just kind of had this very visual representation of these injustices. So I sort of promised myself as I got older that I was always going to talk about the things that people don't want to talk about, that injustices were things that I was going to consistently try to kind of face and talk about. So when I first started working in college admission, I did multicultural recruitment for a public college in Georgia. And something that that really troubled me at the time was that while I was supposed to be doing this, an institutional priority was multicultural recruitment, we were bound to rules by the Board of Regents, which required that my institution was not allowed to admit undocumented students. So here I am kind of finding this tension between what is being said as an institutional priority and these very valuable perspectives and deserving students who are not who are banned access to the institution. And I thought about kind of segregation by other names, right? Like that's what was happening in New Orleans with the school system. And that was what was happening with kind of these bans from undocumented students being able to attend schools, certain schools in Georgia. So during my first legislative day, I was 22 years old, right out of college, walked into my legislator's office. We had a one-on-one meeting. I was terrified. And I felt really, I felt a little bit more comfortable in the fact that the legislators seemed to be very kind of politically aligned with kind of, you know, my beliefs, until I brought up my belief that we should kind of work toward an end to this ban for undocumented students. I was really disappointed by some of her comments during that part of our conversation. But similar to something that Emily just mentioned, at the same time, even though I was frustrated by some of her ignorance, it also signaled to me like, oh, I actually know so much more about this issue than this legislator does. And, you know, that's disappointing in some ways, but also it gives you a lot of confidence. Like, yeah, they need me in this space to be telling these stories and to be advocating in this way. I actually know more than I realized that I did. So I went from feeling like terrified walking in to a little shocked that we had such a disagreement in this issue to feeling really empowered and leaving that room and being like, Ashley Young was the government relations chair at the time. And I'm like, how can I want to talk more about this. I want to do more with this, right? And so that kind of set my SACAC journey, but also my experience with advocacy. So that's a little bit of a background on my story, but also kind of segues into what those conversations are going to look like. So I wanted to talk a little bit about ways that you can prepare for the meetings, what you can expect during the meetings, like essentially like an outline of the conversations, and then what you can anticipate after the meetings, or what you can kind of do after the meetings as well to maintain those relationships. All right, so as you're preparing for a meeting with a legislator, and I should also say, like, you're already preparing by being here, hearing CJ talk about the different NACAC pillars. Those are the things that we talk about. Hearing Ashley talk about how bills come to be, how do they become laws? All of those things are really kind of preparing you for these meetings and what those conversations will ultimately look like. So start by doing your research. I would research the legislator that you're planning to meet with, and I would research a couple of different things. I would see what kinds of committees they're a part of, because if they're part of an education committee or higher education committee, that conversation might look a little bit different than if they're part of an appropriations committee, right? Still both really relevant, but you might kind of shift the conversation based on where they have that power. So a little bit about their kind of legislative background. I would look at probably like the party that they're a part of, though, again, that might not mean a lot sometimes. And then I would also look at, bills that they might be sponsoring. Sometimes they might be like, oh, like, while I have you, I'm interested in what you think about this bill or something like that. So kind of looking into any education related bills that they might be sponsoring. And then the other thing I would tell you is do a little bit of research on them personally. Maybe find out where they where they went to college, if they volunteer for a certain organization or something like that. I think that can tell you a lot in terms of being able to build a relationship with them, and also about kind of some of their what their priorities might look like. You also want to strategize your conversation. So my first conversation was one-on-one, but I have certainly since then been in a lot of meetings with legislators and other people. And I think it can be really helpful to strategize in advance. Okay, I'm going to cover this piece. You're going to cover this piece. This is how we're going to end, that kind of a thing. So whether you're by yourself and you just kind of develop an outline, or if you're with a bigger group, you might want to kind of delegate who's going to speak about what. Knowing your ask is really important. So I know in admission, a lot of the time we talk about the so what of an essay. Like if a student's writing an essay, what ultimately do you want this story to say to colleges when they read your essay? I think in a similar way, you need to know what your final ask is. So it's great to give all the information, but like, what are you asking them to do? Is there a bill out there that you want them to support? Is there someone that you want them to connect you with? What is your ask at the end of this meeting? And then creating an elevator pitch. So in a minute, I'm going to show you like an outline of what your conversations can look like. But sometimes you have to get straight to the point. I think I've been really fortunate that a lot of the time legislators have like made time to, sit in on meetings with me. But sometimes you're, just walking with them in the office or in the legislature. You're walking around with them and they just have like 5 minutes and you need to get to the point. Now that I think about it, I literally did have a conversation with the legislator in the elevator. She actually wound up pulling me into her office, which was really nice. But that's because the elevator pitch worked. And so maybe having some kind of an elevator pitch definitely have some kind of elevator pitch prepared that incorporates your ask as part of the conversation. And that could be a good thing to talk a little bit more about in breakout rooms, just putting that out there if you were looking for things to kind of discuss, maybe figuring out what an elevator pitch could look like. Okay, and then during the meeting, you want to introduce yourself. You've heard us say it. I just want to say it again. You're introducing yourself as a member of SACAC when you're on SACAC business. Now, something really cool is that you can obviously use these tools for anything you're interested in. Like, say you are wildly interested in a topic that is completely unrelated to education. You can use these same tips for meeting with legislators. Just in those cases, you're probably not representing SACAC, right? But if you're representing any of those NACAC policy issues that CJ mentioned, you can definitely introduce yourself as a SACAC member. If your institution's cool with it, like you can certainly introduce yourself as a part of their institution as well. But I know for many of us, that is kind of the concern for being involved in this work. And so your way around that is that you are a member of SACAC. You're also a constituent. I feel like anytime I tell a legislator that I am one of their constituents, their ears perk up a little bit. And that's because you really have the power to elect them when you're a constituent. And it helps you kind of, build that relationship, right? So speaking of which, building rapport is really important. If you think about it, like when you meet with a student, you're not like, as soon as they walk in, you're not like, okay, show me your transcript. A lot of the time you are trying to you ask them like, how was your weekend? Like, what have you been up to? That kind of a thing, to kind of develop a little bit of more of a relationship and make this a more human process. So similarly, you want to do the same with legislators. When I met with a Georgia legislator who went to LSU, we wound up having like a really great conversation about New Orleans, actually. And I think we're very, we had very different beliefs politically, but that was something that just like eased us into the conversation. We had some kind of shared common ground. So building rapport can actually give you a lot of power. Telling a story, that's why I started telling you kind of a little bit of my background. I was trying to model that for you, right? So storytelling is so valuable. We tell students that in the application process, that being able to tell your story can really help you stand out in an application process. We tell it to, when I was in admission, tour guides all the time. Don't just list a bunch of facts about the institution, tell stories related to your experience. And similar, that's important to legislators. They constantly tell us that they need our stories. And that's how they're able to get their bills passed in their committees as well. So storytelling should be a component of your meeting. And then finally, remembering to give the ask. So you'll introduce yourself. You'll be like, oh, the weather's, great right now, or something like that. You will be like, I wanted to tell you about my student, Susie, and this is what, Susie went through. And this is why I really think that you should support House Bill so-and-so. So that's kind of what that could look like. And then after the meeting, I think maintaining relationships can be a really valuable experience. So there have been stories of admission counselors like inviting their legislators to college fairs so that they can kind of get experience understanding what's happening on the ground. Sometimes I had, when I was working at Agnes Scott, I had a coworker who had reached out to a legislator, and then that legislator actually reached back out to her to ask for questions about how a bill that they were thinking about sponsoring, like, how would that actually impact students, right? So sometimes it's not what happens in that meeting, it's what happens afterwards, and continuing those relationships can really make a difference. And then something that Emily had mentioned, Betsy, who unfortunately she was supposed to give this presentation but wasn't able to be here today due to an emergency. So I'm trying my best to kind of give some of her insight. But something great that she talked about was how we're great at helping connect students or connect people with resources, right? I can't tell you how many times when I was an admission counselor, a student would ask me some very specific question about studio arts that I just didn't know the answer to. And I had to get comfortable with, hey, I don't know that answer, but I know who does, and I can get back to you. Same as a college counselor, is so-and-so school, like, would they love that? Like, would they like this test score from me? Let me get back to you. I don't know that off the top of my head, but I know someone who would be able to answer that question. And we should feel just as comfortable doing that in this process. They do not expect us to be experts on their process, right? But what's really great is that we have access to people who are experts. So NACAC has a staff of people who, like, this is their expertise, this is what they have degrees in, this is what they do the work in. And so your first resource is me and Kelly. If a legislator asks you a question that you don't know the answer to, reach out to us. And if we don't know, we're going to reach out to NACAC because they have all those resources to help that happen. A few years ago in Georgia, a legislator asked us on our legislative day, what would it cost to lower the student to counselor ratio to, I think it's 250-1 is the recommendation. What would that cost us? And we were like, so glad that you have that question. So glad that's something you want to do. I don't know. And so we reached out to NACAC and they were able to get that information. And we actually increased funding. We didn't get to the 250-1, but increased funding for college counseling at Title I schools that year. And that was huge. That was a real kind of success that we were able to see. And we didn't know that answer immediately, right? So that's kind of your role, is helping to be that resource. And then a few takeaway points that we've been talking about this, but I just really want to double down on it. Pam Ambler from PACE Academy, something that I'd heard her say that has just resonated with me is legislators are politicians. They're experts at getting elected, right? That's what they do expertly. What we do expertly is the work that we do with our students. And so we should feel really, really confident that we know that piece, which is ultimately what they need from us. Legislators need us. Like I said, they use us as resources. They want to hear our stories. They cannot do their work without us. And we have so much power as their constituents. So earlier I mentioned how valuable that is to remind them. It has also been really helpful for me come election season, after having some of these conversations, and informing some of my friends, like, hey, I think, this might be how you want to vote for this person. So that's kind of some of the power that we have. And in closing, something I wanted to do, and y'all, sorry, this might be awkward or weird. I've never done it virtually, but wanted to give it a try, and hope you'll participate with me. At the beginning of the year at Atlanta Girls School, we as faculty kind of got in a circle, and each of us completed this sentence. We would say, I teach for blank. And I thought, since I started this on like why I advocate, but we know that the reason that we really advocate are for those individual students that either, we saw them have outcomes that they really deserved something different, and something policy-wise got in the way, access-wise got in the way, or we're advocating for because we were able to make a difference in a student's life. And we know part of that was because of the support that we were able to provide them that not every single student experiences. So what I would love for each of us to do, and we don't not everyone has to participate in this. People can do it all at once. People can do it whenever it feels right. But for the next 30 seconds, I felt like we could, as people feel moved, come off of mute and maybe just say the sentence, I advocate for blank, whoever that student is. And feel free to anonymize, even if the name that you say out loud is different than what's in your heart, you'll know. But I thought that could be a really powerful moment, is if we just took these next 30 seconds to say, I advocate for blank. So I will go ahead and we can start now.
I advocate for Rachel.
I actually advocate for myself as a public school counselor who is overwhelmed, which leads me to advocate for my fellow public school counselors.
I'll kind of go off of Kelly, and I advocate for my wife and the students she teaches every day.
I advocate for myself as someone who is a continuous learner, and then the students that I work with and those who need to have education and need to feel like they belong in the educational space.
I advocate for Madison.
I advocate for my students who don't see themselves as college material or four-year institution.
I advocate for my undocumented students who, to no fault of their own, do not have the same opportunities as the kids who sit next to them in class every day.
I advocate for students and counselors I'll never meet.
I advocate for first-gen students because I am a first-gen student.
And I advocate for Bintu. Awesome. Thanks, y'all. I really appreciate you participating. I didn't know how that was going to go. And I think we need to move on. So if you want to say it out loud, but not on Zoom, that's totally fine. Maybe just say it out loud in your office, and that could have a similar feeling. Kelly, let me know if you're good with this. I do want to make sure that we have a chance to do the breakout rooms, but we have a little bit over 10 minutes. I still think it's a good opportunity to kind of connect. We were supposed to do a Q&A at the end, but here's what I would recommend instead is that you, if you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat and we can follow up with you, or feel free to email us. Our email address is govrel@sacac.org. There are so many ways to get involved in our committee, which your chairs can kind of talk about. So make sure that you talk to them or reach out to us if you want to get involved in that way. And then One other thing that I wanted to mention
Hey,
is that
really
yeah.
quickly, I want to make sure Kelly gets to do her quote at the
Oh,
end
so
of
sorry.
this.
Okay, yeah. One other thing I wanted to mention, and then I can turn it over to Kelly, is that we have an opportunity to participate in some advocacy on the national level. So historically, NACAC had actually put on an advocacy event on the federal level that has been discontinued. But Illinois ACAC and Rocky Mountain ACAC have put on a co-program and have invited other ACACs to get involved in that. So if you might be interested in advocating on a federal level, the event is going to be in Washington, D.C. on April 29th and 30th. And we are going to send out some information about that after the webinar, but just wanted to make sure that we share that with you right now. So yeah, Kelly?
Do you mind taking it back for me?
Yeah, go back one slide, Jade.
Perfect. Yeah, so thank you first to Jade and Kelly P for all your work putting this together. And just to kind of close this out before we head into our breakout rooms, like, why is this important? For me, as I say here, there's so many ways to help and so many ways to get involved that will fit within your capacity to volunteer. So this work for me has made my overall experience as a college counselor at Baylor School in Chattanooga, Tennessee, just even more rewarding, and has afforded me the opportunity to see beyond the scope of my day-to-day, as I have the privilege of working at an independent school, working within a small caseload. And so I have that capacity to advocate for those who may not be able to attend the Day on the Hill, who may not be able to write that letter. And I would add to this that the other way in which it has enhanced my experience is connecting with others within my state, and thanks to SACAC within the Southeast. So with that, I would say getting to our state mini meetings is the next best moment.
Awesome. I'm going to work on getting that form to be accepting responses. So give me just a minute, but I'm going to go ahead and send everybody to break rooms. There are a few states that just didn't have the amount to make a breakout room. So we're going to keep y'all in the main room. And if you get into your breakout room and want to come back to the main room, that's fine too. But there are some states that I think could definitely have some great conversations, even if it's just exchanging information to later on get involved in your state activity. So I'm going to go ahead and send you all to those. For anyone staying in the main room, can y'all help me know how to make this form accessible for everybody? Has anybody been able to open it?
I haven't been.
Okay, let me try one more time.
Well, actually now, yes.
Yeah, Kelly.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, okay, we've got Arnell in here and Melanie, who are not state chairs. So I would kind of be interested to hear what maybe I'm going to put y'all on the spot. I would kind of like to hear maybe like why you wanted to join today. Do you feel like it was worth your time? Do you feel like we didn't hit on anything that motivated you to join today? Kind of those things.
It's really important to continue to go back to the question of who we advocate for. Just to kind of refresh that and look at why are we doing this? What is our why? Why are we here? So I really appreciate the opportunity to revisit that and then also be able to revisit it with my staff. So thank you for that. And it's also, the other thing is, am I advocating for too many groups of people? You know, are we focused? Where is our focus? So.
Oh, I
So
think
thank
that's such a beautiful point, Melanie. My mom always reminds me that genuine change takes time. And I think if like you take on too many things, you get overwhelmed and you don't see the wins. And so I think that's such a good idea, is to like focus on the wins that you can get right now. And then you'll have that momentum to make more and more change as you go. So I think that's
Thanks.
great. Arnell, did anything resonate with you today? Am I saying your name correctly?
Yep, that's correct, Arnell. Yes, I'm an independent consultant, so I wanted to kind of join in on the call to kind of see what you guys are doing in the advocacy group. I work with a lot of families, and I've just noticed that for them, and if they come from households with educated parents, but they just don't know where to begin how to get started in this process, what they should be doing, what they shouldn't be doing, how to build those relationships with their high school counselors and things like that. So just listening today, it was definitely enlightening. I'm glad that I joined, just learning a lot of things that you guys do, and trying to see where I could fit in.
What state are you in?
I'm in Georgia.
Okay. Melanie, what state are you in?
The great, as Strom Thurmond used to say, the great state of South Carolina.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Arnell, something you said made me think. I had a parent one time who just cried her eyes out, and she said, I have failed my child. I didn't know what I was supposed to do through this process. And I said, I'm sorry, are you a college counselor? And she said,
Right.
no. And I said, exactly. You're their parent.
Right.
Like, I think our parents get confused on that role and think they're just supposed to know everything. And they're not. It changes.
No. Every year it changes. It's different. So that's what I found a lot, is that they really just don't know where to start, or they think they did, and then they get halfway into the process and they like, oh my God, I need help, or I've missed this, or I didn't do this, or because they're just not knowing. And then a lot of times some of them are not using the resources that are provided at their schools. Some of them don't even know it exists. One of the first things I do with them is, hey, let's go to the counseling website at your high school. Let's see what's out there. And for a lot of the students, it's their first time ever visiting the college counseling a counseling website for their high school, where they miss out on potential internships, local scholarships sometimes are posted there. It's a lot of information that they can gain just by looking at that website, and they don't even know to go there. So
I agree. I agree completely. And I think Jade made this point in her presentation, but props to Jade too. We found out Sunday that Betsy was not going to be able to join us due to a death in the family. And so Jade took that on and did such a great job. But in Betsy's presentation, when she did it in Tennessee, she talked about how, again, our job in advocacy is just to tell the story. It's to advocate for those students. And when they do ask those detailed questions, just as we do as counselors, we say, we'll send you back to CJ with NACAC and he can get those figures for you, or that's not our responsibility. And I think that's what's intimidating to people, is they feel like we're supposed to have the answers when we go meet with someone, and we're not. We're just supposed to tell our students' story. And I think that's what's so powerful about this work too. So hopefully Arnell and Melanie, we can get y'all more plugged in with your states too, if you're interested in getting more involved. I would love to get y'all plugged in. I can follow up after this with an email on who your state chairs are. I think what happened too is we had about 100 people register for this, which was the max, and we had a lot of people not show up, and so some of our chairs couldn't get in because of the registration. So I think our South Carolina chairs were going to be here, but I was emailing with one who was having trouble getting in. So
I'm pretty plugged in with our South Carolina folks. So
great. Wonderful. You don't need me to do that then, do you?
I do. I need you to.
I'll do it for you for sure.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Girl, I don't need your help.
I used to work with a bunch of them, so.
Oh, perfect. Perfect. Good deal. Andrew, Bailey, and Steve, I know y'all are in the thick of planning for the spring, aren't you? I'll be reaching
Yeah,
out soon for
that's
scheduling
the
a meeting.
yeah, that's the plan. I guess I'm the only one from Arkansas. Um, so got to do some a little more outreach, obviously.
Well, and I think we're living in really tough times right now. I think we've always lived in tough times, but I think
Mhm.
more than ever, it is really tough right now. And
Yeah.
so I think people are spread really thin, and we're doing the most that we can right now.
Right.
And that's where we got to meet people. We got to meet them where they are.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I just wanted to say I advocate for a lot of the minority first generation students, you know, me being one as well. I've been working with a lot of the Hispanic community here in Little Rock. It's been very empowering. Um, you know, so, you know, one thing that I want to bring some of the folks in our state is to bring those stories together. You know, having worked with legislators in DC before, they hear that story. That's something they can take to legislators rather than data points and boring, you know, letters like, you know, was mentioned before. So, and then helping them make the case. So I'm looking forward to our legislative day next year.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if any of you all are interested in going to DC for that event, definitely fill out that form. We have very limited funding as to people we could support going, but if you feel like that is something your employer would support or your organization and they would fund you to go, definitely fill that out. Or heck, if you got a big tax refund and want to, that's how you choose to spend it, you go right ahead. I've got my eyes on some other things, but oh my goodness. Well, I think everybody should be coming back from breakout rooms soon. Did anybody have any questions before we wrap up?
I just wanted to say thank you, Kelly, for this presentation. Having worked on the legislative side before, I think you guys did a fantastic job, you know, making this digestible, you know, concise, especially like how to speak to legislators. I thought it was spot on.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that, Steve. You're so sweet.
And I want to say, Arnell and Melanie, thank you guys so much for joining too. It's really nice to have like members that are not part of the leadership or committees or anything like that join, just because that's how we get new members and new leadership. And I especially love it when we have people not just on the college side of things involved in any aspect of SACAC, because that's incredibly needed, because y'all see students from different areas and different lights and much more frequently than we do on the college side of things. So it's incredibly helpful for us to better advocate for those students we're trying to advocate for.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Here's Rose and Victoria. My gosh, Victoria, you were at summer seminar. I didn't realize when your name was just on there, but now that I see your face, I'm like, oh, she was at summer seminar.
Hi, I was there. It's nice to see you again.
Nice to see you too. See, we have all these friends across SACAC, y'all. We love it.
Kelly, I just ended breakout room, so people might just start popping in. Yeah.
Did anybody have any final questions before we head out today? And just a reminder, this will be saved on the member portal along with the slides. And we have tested the form again. It is working to take in responses. So anybody who's interested in applying to potentially attend the event in DC, definitely fill that out. But any questions we have right now or final comments?
It's an election year next year, so get ready to vote.
Amen to that. I'm going to send the form again. Thank you for asking about that.
Tagging on to Andrew talking about next year being an election year, I was just kind of looking a few minutes ago, and Alabama at least already has out the bills that are going to be like the proposed bills that are going to be on the table. So you might want to check and see if your state has that out. I know it'll probably keep me entertained a little bit whenever I need a break from work stuff, to kind of read those and see what's going on in the state.
Absolutely. And definitely a plug for our Day on the Hill events in the spring. Most of them are already on the calendar for SACAC. So once we wrap this up, if y'all want to go and look for your own state event and register for that, that would be awesome. Any other questions?
I just wanted to take a moment to thank Kelly and Jade. I think Christy Connolly was on with me, but on behalf of the presidential team for SACAC and all the rest of us, this is really super cool. I always love learning from them, and I hope you all do as well. One of the things that we were talking about in North Carolina community is the opportunity for SACAC to partner with state school counselor associations who also have government rel people often have their own Day of the Hill events. And so if you're looking at the task that seems monumental about trying to host your own thing, partnering and putting resource and people behind supporting that could also be an option for you.
Absolutely. We've seen a lot of success with that in some states. That's been super helpful.
I just want to say thank y'all. Sorry, I just want to say I know this has been long, so I really appreciate you being with us through this whole time, and just appreciate you taking this time for your students, for your states, and for SACAC. Really appreciate you. Kelly, anything you wanted to say?
I want to shout out Jay because we just found out like Sunday that Betsy wasn't going to be able to be here. Please send her positive thoughts. She had a very unexpected emergency, but Jay took on that presentation, so major shout out to her. But thank y'all for joining today, and this will be available on the SACAC member portal. Y'all have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Oh, thanks, Jane.
I had a quick question, but it was still